The night before the dinner that changed my life, my mother looked straight at my 8-year-old daughter and smiled, with the kind of smile that always disguised cruelty as kindness. "Maybe it would be better if you ate in the kitchen tonight, sweetheart. The main table is already full." My daughter looked at me in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She simply waited to see how I would respond. In that moment, I realized she was learning the same lesson it had taken me more than 30 years to understand. Some people can make you feel invisible without ever raising their voices. I simply replied, "Okay." I smiled. Then I kept setting the plates on the table as if nothing had happened. What no one in that house knew was that inside my purse, I was carrying a photograph my family had spent years praying I would never find. And before that night was over, every single one of them was going to see it. My name is Helena Andrade. I'm 33 years old and I live in Campinas, Brazil. For almost my entire life, I was the one who held everything together. I planned birthday parties, paid bills whenever someone in the family came up short, cooked Sunday dinners, and somehow still found time to run the small beauty clinic I built from the ground up after years of saving every dollar I could. In my family, being useful always seemed to be the closest thing to being loved. My daughter, Laura, was nothing like me. She laughed loudly. She asked difficult questions. She never hid her happiness. Maybe that's exactly what bothered my parents so much. They never yelled at her. They never insulted her directly. It was worse than that. They simply acted as if she either took up too much space or didn't deserve any space at all. It depended on the day. Earlier that week, my younger sister, Patricia, announced that she was bringing her daughter to our family dinner. For days, my mother couldn't stop talking about how beautiful, smart, and well-behaved Sophia was. Yeah, when it came to Laura, she didn't say a single word. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. That afternoon, I spent hours making my father's favorite dessert, bought an expensive bottle of wine with my own money, and even brought flowers for my mother, just like I always did. Because for years, I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I gave enough, if I loved them enough, one day they would finally treat me like I truly belonged. What I didn't know was that before the night was over, my daughter would be humiliated in front of everyone. And one photograph buried for years was about to destroy the lie my family had been living for decades. Dinner started the way it always did. My father sat at the head of the table without saying much. My mother floated around the dining room, making sure everyone noticed how beautiful everything looked. My sister, Patricia, couldn't stop talking about Sophia's piano lessons, her grades, and all the trophies she had won that year. Laura sat quietly beside me. Every few minutes she smiled at me, trying to convince herself she was happy just to be there. I hated that she had already learned how to pretend. As I carried the roast to the table, my mother suddenly clapped her hands together. "Oh, before we sit down," she said, "I think we have a tiny problem." Everyone looked at her. She smiled as if she were about to tell a harmless joke. "There are only 6 seats at the main table." She turned toward Laura. "So, sweetheart, would you mind eating in the kitchen tonight? Sophia hasn't seen her grandparents in weeks, and we'd really love to have her here with us." The room became painfully quiet. Laura looked at the empty chair beside my father. Then she looked at me. She didn't ask why. She didn't complain. She was simply waiting for me to explain something no 8-year-olds should ever have to understand. Before I could speak, my father nodded. "It's only one dinner," he said. "She's old enough to be understanding." My sister didn't say a word. She simply pulled Sophia's chair a little closer to the table, as though the decision had already been made. I felt every eye in the room avoiding mine. Not because anyone felt guilty, because nobody expected me to say no. For 33 years, I had been the one who sacrificed first, the one who took the smaller bedroom, the one who paid the extra bill, the one who stayed late cleaning while everyone else laughed in the living room. I had trained them to expect my silence. Laura reached for my hand under the table. Her tiny fingers were cold. "Mom," she whispered, "did I do something wrong?" That question broke something inside me. I looked around the room. Not one person answered her, not even my mother. Instead, she picked up another plate and calmly placed it on the kitchen counter, as if my daughter had already disappeared. I forced myself to smile. "Of course," I said softly, "if that's what everyone wants." The relief on my mother's face was immediate. She thought I had given in. Again. Laura quietly picked up her plate and walked toward the kitchen. She tried to be brave. She even smiled at Sophia on her way past. But I saw her wipe away a tear before she disappeared through the doorway. I waited exactly 10 seconds. Then I stood up. "No," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze in midair. My mother looked confused. What do you mean, no? I looked directly at her. If there is no room for my daughter at this table, I paused, letting the silence settle over the room. Then maybe none of us should be sitting here. For the first time in my life, nobody knew what to say. And that was exactly when I reached into my purse. My fingers wrapped around the edge of an old photograph. The same photograph my parents had hoped had disappeared forever. The room was so quiet I could hear the old clock in my parents' dining room ticking against the wall. Nobody moved. My mother stared at the photograph still resting in my hand. Her smile disappeared. Helena, she said carefully. What is that? I didn't answer. Instead, I slid the picture across the table until it stopped in front of my father. He looked down first. His face lost its color almost instantly. My mother grabbed it from him before he could say a word. The moment she saw it, she froze, exactly as I knew she would. It was a photograph taken 12 years earlier at my parents' 25th wedding anniversary. Everyone was there. My parents, my sister, me. And standing between my father and me was a little girl with bright eyes and curly hair. Laura. She was only a few months old. My father was holding her proudly in his arms, smiling wider than I had ever seen him smile. Written across the bottom, in my father's own handwriting, were the words, "Our first granddaughter, the greatest blessing our family has ever received." I watched my mother's hands begin to shake. She knew exactly what everyone else at the table was realizing. For years, they had insisted that Laura had always been treated the same as Sophia, that I was imagining the favoritism, that I was too sensitive. But the picture proved something else. It proved there had been a time when Laura was loved openly. Something had changed, and they had never admitted it. My sister leaned forward.
Where did you find that?
I looked at her without blinking. In the box Mom told me had been thrown away years ago. Nobody spoke. I continued. Last week, while cleaning out Grandma's old storage room, I found 3 boxes full of family albums. I swallowed. Every album after Laura turned 2 had pages missing. My mother's eyes filled with panic. Helena, don't do this. I ignored her. I found dozens of pictures. I pulled several folded copies from my purse and spread them across the table. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, beach vacations, school plays. In every original photo, Laura stood beside the family. But in every framed version hanging inside this house, she had been cropped out. Sometimes only her arm remained, sometimes half her face. Sometimes there wasn't a single trace that she had ever been there. Laura slowly walked back into the dining room. She stopped beside me. I knelt until we were eye level. "Sweetheart," I whispered. "Come here." She looked at the photographs, then back at me. "Why am I missing?" Her innocent question hit the room harder than any accusation I could have made. No one answered her. Not my father, not my sister, not even my mother, because there was no explanation that could erase years of deliberate choices. I stood up and looked around the table. "You didn't just erase my daughter from your pictures." I paused. "You tried to erase her from this family." No one denied it, and for the first time in years, their silence told the truth better than their words ever could. No one spoke for what felt like an entire minute. My mother kept staring at the photographs, as if they might somehow change if she looked at them long enough. Finally, she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to look like this." I almost laughed. "Then tell me," I said calmly. "How was it supposed to look?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For years, I had listened to excuses. Yeah, that I was too emotional, too sensitive, always imagining things. But photographs don't have feelings. They don't misunderstand conversations. They simply remember. My father slowly pushed his chair back. "I think we've all made mistakes," he muttered. I looked at him. "No," I replied. "Laura never made this mistake. I never made this mistake. The people sitting at this table made this mistake." Over and over again, my sister suddenly stood up. "You're ruining this family over a few old pictures." I shook my head. "No, Patricia. This family was already broken. I am just refusing to pretend it isn't anymore." Laura quietly slipped her hand into mine. I squeezed it gently. For the first time that evening, she wasn't looking at the floor. She was looking straight ahead, confident, safe, seen. That mattered more to me than anything else in the room. I reached for my purse. "We're leaving." My mother hurried toward me. "Please don't do this." "Think about the family." I smiled sadly. "I finally am." Then I looked down at Laura. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" She smiled. "Can we get ice cream?" I laughed through the tears in my eyes. "I think we've earned 2 scoops." We walked out together without looking back. That night, I blocked every family group chat. I stopped paying bills that weren't mine. I stopped organizing birthdays. I stopped fixing problems that other people created. For the first time in my life, I chose peace over approval.
A few weeks later, something unexpected happened.
My father showed up alone at my beauty clinic. He looked older than I remembered. He placed a cardboard box on my desk. Inside were dozens of original family photographs, every single picture of Laura that had been hidden, removed, or replaced over the years. I should have stopped it, he said quietly. I didn't, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. It wasn't the apology I had waited years to hear, but it was honest. I accepted the box, not because everything was forgiven, but because the truth finally had a place to exist. Today, those photographs are framed in my home, every single one of them. Laura loves walking past them. One afternoon, she looked at the wall, smiled, and said, "Mom, now I know I was always part of the family." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "You were never the one who didn't belong. They were simply too blind to see what they had." That dinner ended with my parents losing control of the story. They had spent years trying to rewrite, but my daughter gained something far more valuable. She grew up knowing that she would never have to shrink herself to make someone else feel bigger, and that was the greatest family legacy I could ever give her.